I'd like to welcome people to the next panel, which is about the human rights internships. The human rights internships are supported by the provost, the college, the social sciences division, the social services, School of Social Services Administration, the medical school, and numerous alumni donors, including Richard and Ann Posen, Isaac Wolf, Bob Ellis, and others who provide us with the capacity to give 25 to 30 funded human rights internships per summer. They are funded at a level of $5,000. We're currently picking the class of 2009. The student panel is going to be moderated by Dr. John Schuman. Dr. John Schuman is he's perfect to talk about the practice of human rights because he is both an advocate and a practicing physician. He teaches at the medical school and is the co-chair of the Human Rights Board. He's taught courses on health and human rights. He's taught in human rights contemporary issues, and we are very pleased to have him to moderate this panel today. Are you guys ready to go? John, why don't you?
Thanks, Susan. Oh, that looks great. So we move a little bit from theory into practice. And as you know, the UDHR is 60, and the Human Rights Program at University of Chicago is now 10. And the cornerstone of our program is the internship program. And you're seeing before you the current today heroes of human rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the heroes of today and tomorrow. So we're going to start with Aruj Chowdhury, who did a human rights internship. She's a fourth year in the college. She did her internship last summer with Human Rights First in New York.
All right, my name is Aruj Chowdhury, and I'm a fourth year in college, and I just finished my internship at Human Rights First. And so let's get started before we take more time. I took my internship to New York, and I went to Manhattan, so you see this beautiful map here. And I just decided to show you where we were on 3rd floor on 7th Avenue and 28th Street. So to give you a picture of location, which is extremely important when you're deciding to do human rights advocacy. I'm going to refer to Human Rights First hereafter as HRF. So Human Rights First was founded in 1978, and it was initially called the Lawyers Committee for International Human Rights. And it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan international human rights organization that's based in New York as well as in DC. And frankly, it's unlike any other nonprofit that I've ever stepped foot in. First of all, it's substantively staffed, and also because there appears to be a lot of funding, at least for now. There are about 78 staff members in the New York office, and adding the DC office, there are about 93, which is pretty big for my experience in the past nonprofit world. Human Rights First has a charter and a mission, and the charter aims to it exists to protect and defend the dignity of each individual through human rights and rule of law. It fights for equality and freedom of thought, expression, and association and religion. It supports people who struggle to promote these principles within their own societies, and it works to hold accountable those under the law who violate these principles. And so all of these charter missions then formulate into how the programs operate, and there are about 5 programs at Human Rights First. So the mission is to protect people at risk, those refugees who are fleeing persecution through the Refugee Protection Program, victims of crimes against humanity, obviously through their Crimes Against Humanity program, victims of discrimination through their Fighting Discrimination program, and fighting for those who are subject to violations due to national security through the Law and Security program, and last but not least, protecting those human rights advocates who fight and defend their rights and others' rights on grounds, which is through the Human Rights Defenders program, which is where I was based. And by using all these 5 programs, Human Rights First aims to affect change using policymaking, justice through courts, raising awareness through media, and most importantly, mobilizing people to act on their mission and mobilizing people to take action on the current alerts. So Human Rights Defenders program is it's one of the first, and as a matter of fact, the second that was started at Human Rights First. And I, didn't really know what, you can just guess what a defender is, but really the breadth and network of who these individuals are, and to the extent they go to protect rights of others, that I was clueless about that. So to spare you guys from that, figuring out what it is, human rights defenders are basically individuals who, either individually or with other, aim to protect and promote human rights, either of themselves or of a larger group. And in that sense, the HRDP program then aims to support human rights defenders under threat and helps to amplify their voices through policymakers. Initially, Human Rights Defenders program was considered and started as Lawyers for Lawyers support network, and later over the decades it evolved in this including student activists, trade unionists, reporters, and there's a large constituency and a network of individuals who are considered defenders to this day, and we start continuing with supporting lawyers as well who go to lengthy extents to protect their clients and protect the cases that they're working on. And since the evolution has happened, it's really interesting that recently there was a clause that was added to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights Defender that protects specifically women human rights defenders. And women human rights defenders are extremely sensitive, and they're critical that they need protection in the sense that through their advocacy, they are every single day challenging the traditional gender roles, and in doing so, they become subject to extreme scrutiny in their human rights advocacy work, as well as in the kinds of projects that they choose to advocate for. And the kinds of violations that is often seen in women human rights defenders includes sexual harassment and violence, including rape, specific forms of torture, physical abuse, threats of divorce or disownment, discrimination, including male human rights defenders, verbal abuse, including the use of term feminist in a derogatory sense, and sexual baiting. Attacking a women defender's reputation by using the most pejorative label available, such as whore. So these are the two main groups that Human Rights Defenders Program aims to protect. And we do this through three different missions and through three different mediums. First is DAN, which is the Defender Alert Network. So it was really neat to walk in every day and not know what country you were going to be working on. It could be China one day, it could be Colombia, it could be Guatemala, Indonesia, Thailand, and really just focusing on specific defender cases. So-and-so was arbitrarily arrested because they voiced an opinion against the government. So-and-so wrote a blog about promoting women's rights under Iranian laws, and then they were subjected and harassed and their houses vandalized. So really these sorts of specific cases that we were working and ended with specific recommendations to governmental bodies, presidents, attorney generals, hoping to mobilize individuals to take action and sign the petition. So we would have this DAN up for about a week, and then after 2 weeks we would have a petition where we would have about 2,000 people who signed this, and it would later be sent to the Office of Human Rights Defenders at the United Nations. And follow-up session was the urgent action alert that we filed with the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders that further really synthesized what happened, who the perpetrators were, and what specific human rights violations happened. So given today's context and talking about UDHR, this was really interesting that the language and the rhetoric of using international human rights standards was very centric to everyday work. We used Article 19 of protecting freedom of expression and association. We use Article 12 in terms of protecting individuals from arbitrary harassment or detention. And that was very much at the core of promoting these specific cases. And last but not least, we had focus country reports, urgent press releases, and letters that we used given a specific project and what it asked for at that time. So our focus countries, just to let you know, were Indonesia, Iran, Guatemala, Cuba, and Egypt as well. And we've also done, in terms of time-sensitive, China when the Olympics were happening, Russia in terms of the Georgia conflict, Pakistan in terms of the justice, accountability, martial law, and the house arrest. So we had a very small team, and I was the fifth member, hence the title. And I used a lot of what I just mentioned in terms of how we operate as a program, and that was very centric to what I did throughout my 10 to 12 weeks in New York. And I did country reports in Thailand and Egypt, specifically looking at the conflict between Muslim students in South and religious, conflicts, looking at women's defenders and their situation in these respective countries, and often did urgent alert memos depending on the specific DAN that we had just sent out. And the most exciting part of my summer was meeting defenders, and I sat in on UN sessions on prisoners of conscience, which I will later talk about. I have a specific story to discuss, and that was extremely moving to really put a human face to the defenders that I was advocating for day in and day out in my whatever difference I made doing that. And also met defenders from Kenya and did phone interviews with women human rights defenders in Indonesia, and personally met the Pakistani lawyers who were arrested, the Atzaz Hassan, who's the Supreme Bar Court president, and his team was here and actually met with them to talk specifically about, at that point, about the impeachment or resignation of former President Pervez Musharraf. And I, at the same time, did a specific, and this was really also interesting to do because the WHRD program, the Women's Human Rights Defenders Program, was just a pilot program. We had just started, and this was one of the first things that we were doing. And so it was really interesting to see that the reports that I was creating were now going to be used, as a matter of fact, this upcoming month in December, on this commission that's going on for women's human rights in Cape Town. So that was really exciting to be engaged in something that we're doing for the first time, and it's actually going to be taken into account and being used. There was a lot of possibility and a lot of flexibility, so I also did work with Crimes Against Humanity program, looking at the rape as an intimidation tactic post-2008 election in Zimbabwe, and also did an intake with Refugee Protection program, specifically from journalists from Pakistan, and serving as a translator and putting together their cases. So going back to my specific story that I wanted to share with you guys is this panel that I told you I attended at UN, and it's titled Courageous Voices Speaking Out for Prisoners of Conscience, and this was a panel on July 24th, 2008. The remarks that I'm going to, the excerpts of the remark that I'm going to read from are that of Ong Din, who's the co-founder and executive director of Washington, D.C.-based U.S. Campaign for Burma. And Mr. Din is a Burmese citizen, and he was arrested, and he spent 4 years behind bars, basically for helping to organize countries' pro-democratic convention and uprising in August 1988. Some of you are probably familiar with it as an 8808 because it's August 8th, and yeah. And he was released in 1993, and he left Burma. He flew Burma in 1995, and then he's been living here since 2001. So I'm going to quickly read an excerpt that he talked about in the session that really just grappled with me and changed my entire outlook and perspective on who it was that I was working in whatever capacity that I was, and what it really means to be a human rights defender. So he writes, I was arrested by military intelligence, which is known in Burma as MI, or a passenger bus, while I was moving from a hiding place to another. A group of strong men forcibly removed me from the bus, blindfolded me, and handcuffed me in my back and threw me into a waiting truck. For 2 hours, I was on the floor of the truck, lying and facing the dirty floor, and these men put their boots on my body. For them, I was defeated. I heard their voice reporting to their boss using a walkie-talkie that their mission was accomplished. I realized that a gate of hell was open. For a month, I was detained in military intelligence headquarters on the outskirts of Rangoon, former capital of Burma. After 2 hours of drive, I was thrown into a small room, subsequently tortured severely and continuously. Sometimes I was like a soccer ball on the football field, being kicked by several players. Sometimes I was a punching bag, being hit by many fists. Sometimes I was hanging from the ceiling, upside down, with my head drowning in a bucket of water. I couldn't protect the attacks, as my eyes were blindfolded. I couldn't avoid these kicks, as my hands were tied. A group came in for torture, then they left. Then another group came in for questioning. Then they left. Then another group came in for torture. Torturing and interrogation took turns for 7 days continuously, days and night, and I was not given food and water. I was not allowed to sleep and use toilet in these days. I was not even allowed to lose my consciousness. When I passed out, they took off the blindfold and simply splashed cool water on my face to wake me up. Once I got a small piece of brick that I had picked up from a nearby bathing place. I used this piece of brick and drew a calendar on the wall. First, I made the 7 columns and marked the days, Sunday, Monday, etc. Then I made the 5 rows and marked the dates, from 1 to 30. Then I checked off every day I passed. 1 month had quickly ended. I had to draw another month, then another month. One day, a prison official noticed these calendars on the wall, and he went ballistic. He instructed the warders to bring me to his office. He accused me that I was violating the prison rules and decided to give me a punishment, which was a 3-day stay in a pitch-black cell with only glue for food. After that punishment, I decided that I would try to avoid punishments in the future, but it was very difficult to do so, because first, we could not always obey these dirty regulations. Second, there were many rules that cannot be remembered all the time. Third, prison authorities are always trying to find mistakes for the political prisoners purposely. Therefore, almost all political prisoners have to go through the experience of various severe punishments in jail. And I received punishment again and again. Now I'm in freedom, but many of my colleagues are still in prisons in Burma. They are not criminals. Actually, they are the future of our country, and their lives should be used for building a better nation. They should be freed immediately and unconditionally, and they should be allowed to participate in the country's political process. That is why we are appealing to the UN Security Council to take an effective action in Burma. However, the Security Council is paralyzed by 2 veto powers, China and Russia. So there were about 5 prisoners of conscience at this session, and it was really interesting to go through this and to see what it means to be a human rights defender and using what we have in terms of international standards to affect the kind of change that we can. I have a quote here that I won't necessarily read out, but I have something important that I want to highlight to contextualize today's presentation in the 60th anniversary of UDHR, is to remember that there are 2 things that we should keep in mind, which is that we should constantly question what we are given in terms of information. We should be constantly vigilant because challenges and threats to our civil liberties and human rights are always present. And these defenders truly make that an argument and really make it aware that that is something that every single day that we should have in the back of our minds. And another is to keep the role of the United States in this context, and that is to think if we have to create a global framework, we have to be inside the discussion, and which I found at HRF to be really doing was not to send a letter to just presidents and these governmental bodies and say, well, this is what's wrong in your country, but really giving suggestions and allowing people in the global community to sit on and sign the petition and get their voices heard and to say this is a collective action and we are going to support you as much as we can. And we're here, and the fact that we're listening to what is happening. So that was, and by the way, this is my desk that I had. Just wanted to throw that in there. So I would like to wrap it there, and we'll continue with other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Aruj. We're going to hold questions till the end if we have time before the next session. Next up, I'll just say to the remaining presenters, I'm standing over here. When I stand up, I'm trying to give you like a 2-minute warning. Toussaint Lausier, who is a PhD candidate in history, did his human rights internship at the Western Cape Anti-Eviction Campaign in Cape Town, South Africa.
Hello, everybody. My name is Toussaint Lausier. I'm a third-year history PhD student, and I was very fortunate to get one of the human rights programs, human rights internships, summer internships. And I actually ended up working with, thank you very much, ended up working with the Western Cape Antieviction Campaign, which is a grassroots social movement based in Western Cape, which is one of the 9 provinces in South Africa. And their work is primarily based, although it's not exclusive to Cape Town, it's primarily based in Cape Town. So I was in and around Cape Town for most of my time there. So, just to tell you a little bit about the Western Cape Anti-Eviction Campaign, the Anti-Eviction Campaign is a grassroots social movement primarily based in Cape Town, South Africa. And if you were to talk to members of the Anti-Eviction Campaign, they would describe it as a movement of South Africa's militant poor, or a grassroots social movement. And basically, it's a movement that's emerged since the end of apartheid in South Africa. And it's primarily dealt with a lot of the basic socioeconomic needs of the poorest of the poor, as they would call themselves, or they do call themselves in South Africa. And basically, I had some experience with the Western Cape Anti-Eviction Campaign before I participated in this internship. I had actually done some of my senior thesis research when I was an undergrad, I guess what you all would consider your BA research, on the political thought of this organization, particularly looking at how they conceive themselves, how they understand not only their own movement but the state, and sort of what post-apartheid South Africa means, right? And what it means to have a movement in post-apartheid in a period after which South Africa is understood to have achieved its liberation. And my relationship with the movement continued after I finished my BA research in 2003. I worked for a small environmental justice organization based in Boston, and had a very nice relationship with my boss. So that basically when I had to travel to South Africa for staff meetings, he was nice enough to give me a couple days vacation to catch up with people in Cape Town and sort of see what was happening and what was taking place. And it was really, I think, a really significant opportunity for me to be able to go back and work with the Anti-Eviction Campaign. I think as opposed to other folks who might have been working with the organization that they got to intern with for the first time, I had some prior experience with them. I sort of knew how to get around some of the different townships that I was staying in, and so I felt like I could act relatively independently. They, constantly, my supervisors and other folks were telling me that I shouldn't be doing what I was doing in terms of going around where I was going and, feeling comfortable enough to sort of move by myself. But I had a relative sense of how to get from point A to point B. And if you think about, or if you ever get the opportunity to see the way a lot of the townships and also the transportation system is set up in South Africa, in a way that's also kind of analogous to a lot of different poor communities. If you don't know where you're going, right, you're going to stand out right away. And the only, people who are from that area will know how to get from one location to another. So most of my work with the Anti-Eviction Campaign basically focused on assisting some of the organizing that they're doing. And the campaign is active in over 24 communities throughout Cape Town primarily, focusing on organizing and mobilizing communities to meet their basic needs. And part of the necessity of the campaign and its work really has to do a lot with the emergence of a post-apartheid moment in South Africa in the way that political liberation coincided with economic liberalization in a number of ways. The implementation of structural adjustment programs and sort of neoliberal development, economic development, had begun to take place prior to the end of apartheid, as early as the late 1980s under the Nationalist Party. But the part of what is known relatively well in South Africa, but not so well outside, is that in the process of coming to power, the ANC, the ruling African National Congress, which was then one of the main liberation parties, made a number of concessions to different corporate powers, different economic elites within South Africa, and had to make a number of economic concessions that basically ended up constraining the state's ability to really improve the lives of the poor majority, and also helped implement a particular very market-based path to development that really ended up, as much as it attempted to make possible, right, the provision of housing for people who had been previously homeless, the provision of basic services from water to electricity. At the same time, a lot of those people, if you weren't able to pay for these services, would get cut off from electricity, would get cut off from water. So over the past, say, decade and a half in South Africa, while homes have been provided to, say, a little bit more than 1 million people, that same number of people have been evicted in different circumstances, right, in different parts of the country. And so what the Anti-Eviction Campaign emerged out of was efforts to prevent these evictions, prevent these water cutoffs in a lot of the poor townships in Cape Town, and in a sense provide an umbrella under which different communities have been able to struggle, communities that would not normally relate to each other on different parts of the city, which is actually a very massive and far-flung city, to really have a sort of a common unity, a common program, and a way to work together. So I'm going to, my friend over there is standing up, so I'm going to go through some of these photos. And it's going to be a little bit like this is what I did with my summer vacation, but I'm going to just kind of go through and explain some of what's going on. 2 minutes, okay. A lot of what I did focused on assisting residents of the Delft township in Cape Town who had previously, there were about 1,600 families that illegally occupied homes back in December of 2007. And these homes that are right here in the background, they illegally occupied those homes, held them for about 2 months, and then there was a sort of a series of mass evictions that the police carried out, evicting those folks. And all those families had said, look, we've been on the housing waiting list for over a decade now. We've been living in our parents' houses. We've been renting backyard shacks from other people. And these houses are being built, and they should be provided to us or not being provided to us. This is a couple of the residents in Symphony Way. And basically, when these folks were evicted from their houses, they were left along the pavement on a road that's called Symphony Way. And there were different sort of political factions. Some who were with one political party went another way. Some who were with another political party went another way. The Anti-Eviction Campaign had been very involved in helping to organize and mobilize these communities, and had thus helped convince some of the residents, look, you're here for houses, your struggle isn't finished yet. They want you to go and live in either a temporary relocation area or to live in a tent or to just sort of disappear, but you all need to stay here, you need to stand your ground. And the residents basically agreed to do this and have been, actually, when I was there, had been on the pavement for about 6 months, and are still there today, right? Although because of their efforts are actually getting allocated housing through the provincial Department of Housing. And so these are some of the housing. You see the little sort of like Winnebago thing right there. There's also residents basically built their own shacks, built their own housing for the period of time, and basically built it up, right, from, I think it was January to what it is today. And part of the difficulty was during the time that I was there is actually the winter in South Africa, right? So we were dealing with, really, treacherous. It was raining. It was windy. It was really kind of nasty a lot of the time, and folks basically had to make a way during the period of time. Some of the folks are employed. Some of the folks are unemployed. Here's Table Mountain in the background. Very picturesque spot. And so a lot of the basic work I did was, as you can see, if you can see behind here is the office for the Anti-Eviction Campaign. And so I just did, sort of everyday work from putting together press releases, helping. I would go to sort of local internet cafes and help update the website, wrote stories about what was taking place, and kind of tried to do this. Another thing I had to do was sometimes I had to go collect firewood. There was like a bush in the background, so I had to helped out with that. But it kind of gives you an idea of what are some of the basic needs that folks had to deal with on a regular, everyday basis. And as you can see, people are right alongside the road, on the pavement alongside the road. And I think my second day there at the settlement, there was a child who was hit in the road by a speeding motorist, actually a drunk driver who came through. And after that, the residents there resolved to, they ended up blockading the road, right? The road was supposed to have been blockaded by the police, but it wasn't secure. People came through all the time, and so they They actually put up a physical barricade. At one point, the police came by. They weren't too happy about it. I got pepper sprayed. A couple people got beat up, were arrested, taken away. And you can see the stone blockade that's actually put up here. They would remove it for the police, but actually had to keep it for any of the combi taxis or other folks who came through. So they were here sort of, telling this guy to turn around. Right here, entrance for residents only and what have you. Now, part of what the anti-eviction campaign was also doing was engaging in a larger project, and I'm going to go through this and wrap up, but engaging with a larger project that's very much connected to the effort to make South Africa Cape Town more of a global city, particularly in preparation for the 2010 World Cup. And a lot of this has to do with gentrifying or cleaning up the shack settlements, the squatter camps that are along the sides of the Into Gateway, Into Highway, which is a major sort of thoroughfare in and out of the city. And one of the projects or attempts to do this is through this national pilot project called the Into Gateway Project. And what that's actually trying to do is replace a lot of the shack settlements with formal housing, but doing it in a very selective way that actually marginalizes a lot of the communities that are actually living there right now. And so what the anti-eviction campaign has tried to do is build connections between the residents in some of the shack settlements who are being faced with forced removal to make way for the construction of new housing, as well as some of the folks who currently live in at least part of the project that's been completed. And those residents are actually currently on a rent boycott because when they occupied their houses, they found that the rent they were being charged was more than they had originally agreed to, and that the quality of the houses was much below what they considered to be proper housing construction, right? There was the key for any of the houses could open in the other ones, there was no sort of individual meter. So by working and sort of organizing a lot of these mass meetings and protests, there was a lot of positive developments that were able to come out of what the anti-eviction campaign does and how it's working to mobilize a lot of the residents around these very basic concerns. Two actions that are being done that were done while I was there that I assisted in, which were really important, were a mass march that took place in late July that brought together residents from a variety of these different areas, folks who would not normally be in the same space, be able to communicate to each other or sort of link up through transportation or what have you. And then there was, we brought about 100 or a little over 100 members of the anti-eviction campaign from different areas together to attend a constitutional court case in Johannesburg. And to actually have some of the communities that are being faced with forced relocation to actually attend the court hearing and try to put some, not only kind of directly represent themselves in the process of the case being decided, but also put some pressure on the court to recognize their needs and effectively address some of their concerns. So, thank you very much.
Our next intern report is from Zoe Van Gelder, who's a fourth year in the college, who worked in Bolivia with the Unidad Académica Campesina. And I'm sorry, panelists, due to our time constraint, we're going to try to limit them each to 10 minutes or so if we can, okay?
So one cold, starry night in June, I took the last bus to Tiwanaku, a small rural community outside of La Paz, Bolivia. And I was snuggled up against the window with a woman and child next to me, marveling at the intense darkness outside of my window and the reality that this and the low, soothing hum of Aymara would be my way home for the next 3 months. I had no idea what to expect. I had been recently rid of my laptop and camera in an unfortunate exercise of what we will call wealth redistribution. And I arrived at the Unidad Campesina without any of the tools that I thought I needed to conduct my research. My mission there was to complete a diagnostic on traditional agricultural technologies in 3 rural Aymara communities, one being Tiwanaku, The Unidad Académica Campesina, that I will refer from here on as the UAC, is a branch of the Catholic University of Bolivia. It's a prestigious, mostly city university, and it offers degree programs in zoology, tourism, and animal husbandry. So in planning my internship, I had clearly envisioned what the human rights that my project would be targeted. That didn't make sense. What my project would focus on in terms of human rights. And that was food security and reduction of risk in agricultural production. So referring to the celebratory UNDHR, that would be Article 25, that everyone has a right to adequate livelihood, including food. And more peripherally, I was going to be involved in upholding Article 26. Everyone has a right to education. More specifically, everyone has everyone has a right to equal access to higher education, which is definitely an issue in Bolivia. And the UAC was one of the few rural universities that provided education for subsistence farmers or campesinos. Upon my arrival, I had very little sense of what other human rights issues I would be dealing with, that the legacies of past human rights struggles, the present struggles for justice in Bolivia, and that the future desires for justice would play a large role in both my completion of the project and the hurdles that I faced in completing the project. I also didn't realize how much the international human rights movement paralleled the issues that were being faced on the ground in these rural communities in Bolivia. Guiding me through this journey was an incredible Catholic priest, and I can't believe I'm saying that because I'm not religious whatsoever, and had a very grim view of what a Catholic priest was before I met this man, Claudio Patti, who had founded the university 20 years before. He was a symbol of progress himself. He was one of the few Aymara priests very high up in the Catholic Church, and believed that education and spirituality were key to peace and justice and freedom and development in Bolivia. On my first weekend there, he took me to a mass, a funeral, and a wedding all in one day. And we traversed this ancient landscape in his old SUV and had a really fascinating conversation about why he had decided that the UAC was the best way to commit his time apart from his religious duties, and what the implications of the UAC were for rural development in these communities. He explained to me that in addition to the spiritual development of these community members, and he mostly referred to it as recognizing of their humanity through spirituality, that access to education, access to resources were going to enable them to mobilize the recent rights that they had gained access through the new constitution that was established only a year or two before. I immediately got my feet on the ground the next day. I developed a survey to assess the traditional techniques that had disappeared in these three communities, Tiwanaku, Achacachi, and Totora, and we were looking at production methods, cultivation strategies that dated back to pre-Inca times, things called sucacoyus, terracing, interesting forms of polyculture that increase production. In addition to that, we were looking at risk management, how frost and the extreme weather conditions that are faced at 4,000 meters were dealt with before the introduction of modern agriculture. I was working with students that were enrolled in a continuing education program that had recently been set up by the UAC. In addition to the campus, which I'll show you a picture of in a couple minutes, they had started a year earlier 3 programs in the 3 communities where I was working that were targeted at students who were much older than the 20, 21-year-olds who had just graduated from high school, enrolled in the tourism and agronomy programs. They typically had their own plots of land, had been subsistence farmers for 15 years now, and were looking to get a degree. With them, we developed the survey together, and we were to collect ethnographic interviews and speak to municipal leaders about the changes that these communities had experienced over mostly the last 20 years. Through these interviews and through my discussions with these students and NGOs and municipal officials, I realized just how incredibly recently the establishment of basic human rights had come to these communities. Only in 1952, with Bolivia's agrarian reform, had the hacienda patrones system been abolished. That was only 4 years after the UDHR's proclamation of Article 4, which declared that no one shall be held in servitude. The hacienda system, for those of you who don't know, basically was a form of slavery, indentured servitude, where campesinos were forced to produce for a leader, or a hacienda owner, rather. Moreover, as I mentioned before, Article 6 had only been Article 6, which is equal access to justice or rights, or representation before the law, had only become a reality for most of these community members within the last couple of years, and it was still a very real struggle for them. What I discovered was more than this survey being a real look into agricultural production, it was a validation of these community members' humanity, a validation of their ability to contribute to the academics, politics, and economic prosperity of a nation state that they had only been recently recognized in. This is not to say that traditional technologies don't offer sustainable solutions for future development in these communities. It's just that I was not equipped to conduct such a survey, and neither were any of the students that I was working with, realistically. However, my research conclusions were useful for understanding the role of social and cultural shifts in these communities over the last 20 years on production, changes in land holding, changes in labor mobilization, and changes in politics that had all influenced the social means of production. Really, though, my greatest contribution was validating the importance of these community members' voices. Unfortunately, I, as a blonde white girl from the city, had access to officials at the UCB, the Universidad Católica Boliviana, that was officially involved with the WAC. And I was able to explain to them during the summer, when they were thinking of cutting these re-education programs, that in fact they were important. Now, while it stinks that it was because of my race, because of my background, that I could have the ears of these important officials that were going to control the future of these community members' access to education, that's the reality of the situation in Bolivia right now. My presence and discussion with these officials reaffirms that the commitment and passion that had been demonstrated to me by these students. They would walk miles to come to class, and they spent the little money that they had on taking these degree programs, learning how to sew up cow hernias and things like this, which I had to attend. I mean, it was fascinating, and it was incredible how completely dedicated they were to this idea that education was key to their future generations' development. I was the international eyes that cared, and there were a lot of other representatives in Bolivia, not so much in the rural communities, from the international community that were advocating for this, but that was my main role. That said, really in the end, my contributions were extremely small. The summer and the people that I interacted with had a greater impact on me than I probably did on them. I for sure did on them. They, most importantly, in me, renewed my faith in the importance of the international human rights movement. Access to rights had allowed these community members to push their expectations and their demands for their future generations and for themselves. Evo Morales, a president that looked like them, showed them that there was no limit to what they could demand from their government and from their international community. I had left for this internship disenchanted with development and human rights and what it had to offer to these communities. Specifically, what I had to offer, what my role in the human rights movement could give the world. Were they better off without us? Was aid really effective? On my daily runs, I'd contemplate the implications of the discoveries that I was making through my work. My role in all of this, my role and my future in the human rights movement. At 4,000 meters with the backdrop of ancient landscapes, running at the feet of gods, I'd cross old abuelos on their 40-year-old bicycles, their smiles framed with elegant wrinkles. They'd yell at me, "Where are you going, hermana?" I'd laugh, contemplating how absolutely ridiculous I looked. They smiled and sped off, yelling, leaving me with the wisest words that I've probably ever heard. "Hermanita, wherever you're going, échale compasión." And with that, I'm just going to give you a quick run through my summer vacation, which was probably one of the most intense experiences of my life. This is Tiwanaku and the university, the campus. This is a group of students. The older gentleman is Padre Claudio Pati, who I'm still in communication with. These are students that I traveled through more than just the 3 communities, just trying to get a better understanding of how the food system worked and how production differed at the different altitude levels and different ecosystems. The families welcomed me graciously. Often I was fed with U.S. aid oil and rice that had been donated to these communities, and it was really difficult. This is one of my informants. A lot of my interviews were conducted in Aymara, which I am only learning to speak, so a lot of the translations were done through the students. I thought I had another picture. Bachiri was one of the pilgrimages that they do in August to request that Pachamama, the Earth Mother, I know this sounds all really granola, but it's actually a little more complicated than that. But this is how they would ask to make sure that they had good production for the rest of the year. And this is pictures of the pilgrimage that we woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning with my brother, who was there with me visiting, and went and watched this. So I was focusing on food security. So here's some pictures of what we ate. This is chuño. Chuño is a freeze-dried potato. It's a acquired taste, I think you would say. I promised them, since I was studying food and always asked them about their food, that I would make them an American breakfast. So this is my attempt. And that's Padre, who cleaned his plate off of with the French toast and banana pancakes that I made them. Manka walisuma means really good food in Aymara. So also one of a great experience that I had, I got to dress up like a Cholita. And this was for the independence celebration, and they absolutely insisted that I wore the pollera, which is what the title, I said walk a mile and someone else's pollera. And Magda, my friend who's doing my hair there, lent me her pollera. And it was the craziest day I've ever had, because I wore jeans the whole time I was there, and there was a strange interaction with a young gentleman in the community because they really couldn't approach me, but it was weird. But then I put on this pollera, and everybody, even like older gentlemen, older women, kept coming up to me, "You're so beautiful," and I thought I looked absolutely ridiculous. But I got this reputation of being a coqueta cholita because I had these huge skirts and I loved to dance, and I didn't understand why with these huge skirts you couldn't like move around. So here I'm making everybody laugh because I'm lifting my skirt a little bit. This is me and the padre, and this is me taking the cow out to pasture. And Hayaya Bolivia means Viva Bolivia, so that's it.
Our last panelist tonight is Sion Gurmu, who's now a third year in the college. Mm-hmm. She did an internship with the Ethiopian Women Lawyers Association in Addis Ababa.
I was interning at the Ethiopian Women's Lawyers Association in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia this summer, and I am a native Ethiopian. I was born there and raised in America, so kind of like Tucson, I had some experience in the country that I was working in. I've never lived for an extended amount of time in Ethiopia, and I've definitely never worked there, so it was a very different experience for me, but it was very exciting, and I learned a lot. One disclaimer that I want to make about how my internship was different because of my choice to do it this summer as opposed to any other time. As opposed to any other summer that I may have been able to go, was because there was a huge issue with NGO regulation in Ethiopia this summer that arose, and my organization was directly dealing with, from the first day I arrived, my first day of work, the executive directress of IULA was explaining to me, I guess, a little bit about the Charities and Societies Proclamation that I will refer to as the CSO law from here on out. And so basically, this was what the federal government claimed was an attempt to promote financial transparency among NGOs in Ethiopia and enhance their accountability to stakeholders. However, in reality, if passed, the law would operate as a tool to terrorize and substantially weaken Ethiopian civil society. The draft law, as it stands today, has yet to be passed, bars both foreign and Ethiopian organizations receiving more than 10% of their funding from foreign sources from engaging in activities relating to human rights advocacy, gender equality, children's rights, disabled persons' rights, conflict resolution, and strengthening judicial practices in law enforcement, among other rights-oriented activities. The law also excludes groups from receiving more than 10% of their funding from Ethiopians living in the diaspora, for example, myself, from working on these and other related issues. Given the evident lack of funding in Ethiopia and neighboring countries and development opportunities within those countries as well, it was clear that the law was aimed to criminalize human rights activity and destabilize civil society groups across the board. Furthermore, the law carries severe criminal penalties for violations, including 3 to 5 years of imprisonment for minor administrative violations. It also establishes a Charities and Societies Agency that is meant to regulate civil society organizations with few procedural safeguards and virtually no right of appeals for its decisions. So basically, they could arbitrarily refuse to register any organization and then order the staff or leadership within that organization to file really strenuous demands for documents and other forms of information that would basically just stop these organizations from doing any types of human rights work, engaging in any activities really within the country. So it was a very, very, very big deal that my organization, as a group of lawyers, was attempting to address. And so I was a little bit handicapped during my time there because I don't know so much about the Ethiopian legal system, and there was no way that I could directly engage in the activities that they were engaged in at that time. So I was given a few research projects to engage in during my time there, as well as just kind of shadowing the different attorneys within the organization and the work that they do there. Basically, the work that EOLA does is broken up into 3 categories that I will now go into with you all, and quickly since we are limited on time. I was going to explain to you a little bit about the organization and the way that it's structured. I'll run through it really quickly with you because it is a unique structure. We have a General Assembly that formulates most of the decisions for EOLA, and this pretty much includes anyone who's interested in joining the organization. It's members that are attorneys and then associate members that don't necessarily have a law degree, but they're paralegals or they're interested in the work that EOLA does. They can just join. Down from there, we have a board of directors that basically just oversees. There are 7 members that are elected from the General Assembly, and they help oversee the Secretariat. And the Secretariat is basically made up of, it's elected by the board of directors, and it's made up of the executive directress and the heads of departments and services. So this is basically just flips around the organizational structure that most NGOs have, to where the executive director of the organization is, well, theoretically on bottom, and it's supposed to be informed by, just common folk like me and other attorneys and just people interested in this organization. I don't know if it always plays out like that on the ground, and I don't know if I would say that I had more power in the organization than the executive directors, but that's what it is on paper, and that's really interesting. The main department that kind of leads all the work that EOLA does is our legal aid department, and what we do through there is we distribute free legal advice and counseling in civil and criminal cases to women who are victims of violence, women dealing with marital disputes, paternity issues, maintenance claims, succession rights, employment issues, and the like. Whenever possible, we take mediation activities very seriously in order to reconcile spouses and resolve issues amicably, rather than adopting an adversarial approach, which I thought was very interesting, and it was very different for me to engage with that type of I guess, counseling for women who had even been in situations where domestic abuse was involved, situations where sexual violence was involved, situations where it's just, I guess, even psychological abuse, to where it was just a bad marriage or it was just a bad relationship that she had with another male. They approached it in such a way that they weren't necessarily condemning the guy for doing anything, or it was just, they tried to just resolve the issues in a very like social, not like we're attorneys and we're going to do this and this to you, but let's try and resolve this problem, let's try and keep this family together, which is very, very different than a lot of approaches that I've seen with similar organizations in the U.S., and that speaks to I guess kind of the cultural values that we hold in Ethiopia. Divorce is looked down upon greatly, so they did try and avoid resorting to divorce as much as possible. So that was just very different for me, not good, bad, or anything else, but just a different experience. Our legal aid department was also very much engaged in lobbying ventures, writing letters to government and non-governmental organizations in hopes of like seeking solutions to various problems. That's something that I was able to help the organization with. When needed, we also were instrumental in writing drafts to other documents, petitions, court briefs, affidavits, and memorandums of appeals to courts, which is something I'm learning more and more about. I will be returning to my organization this winter and possibly even next summer, so I'm hopefully going to learn more in that respect. We also have a shelter for victims of sexual violence, but given the draft legislation and cuts on funding that our organization was experiencing, we're at kind of a deadlock. We're not accepting any new women into our shelter because there's just no space. We try and work with other organizations in the country to provide the shelter and services that these women need, but it's a very frustrating situation when you see women, coming into the office day by day and they have to return back to an abusive home just because there's just nothing that we can provide for them. There's no shelter, there's no food, there's no, we just have absolutely no resources. So that, again, was something very different. I've worked with a number of domestic abuse shelters in the U.S., and although they are not always able to provide shelter for the women that may need certain services, there's always been an alternative, and there's always been another option. So working in a situation where there is no other alternative, there is no other place that we can send you, there's really nothing we can give you, that was something that was very hard to swallow for me. The next major department in our organization is research and law reform advocacy. So basically, this was something that I was heavily engaged in during my time there. Some major research projects that we were engaged in included a draft handbook on post-divorce maintenance in Ethiopia, addressing severe economic consequences of divorce for women. We also were engaged in a report on sexual harassment as an unpunishable crime in Ethiopia, and EULA is currently engaged in efforts to put sexual harassment on the books as a law and reform the penal code to include that. One thing that I was personally engaged in was a report on maternal health care in the Ethiopian context, with an emphasis on obstetric fistula. I'm still working on that project, actually. It's due for my organization in December, and when I go back, I will be presenting it at that time. That's something that I want to continue to pursue. I don't know exactly in what way that's going to materialize, but that is something I'm going to continue to pursue. The last thing that we do is public education, which is really tied with our research center, and basically we do training workshops in the communities and just help them know, help community leaders and members learn a little bit more about the research projects we've been engaged in. As soon as we're done with any report, we like to share that with community members, let them know what we found out about certain situations within the capital city of Addis Ababa and also within the rural districts as well, and hear back from our community members about different issues they'd like us to look into or help them with within their communities. If there's high rates of domestic violence or anything, we really work closely with community members to kind of pin down those issues and address them in the best ways that we know how. The last slide that I had was about EULA's beneficiaries. One thing, and I am currently in a course with Susan Zesh, and Aruj is in this course as well, the practice of human rights. And one thing that we focus on in that course is the value of storytelling as a tool in human rights. And this is something that my organization really values. We put out case study booklets on a regular basis, highlighting some of just a few of our cases that we've dealt with within that quarter that really stuck out in our minds for one reason or another. We basically discuss the situations that our women went through. They give us their story. They write it in their words, and we translate it into English. And then after the story is done, we talk about the laws that affected these women in those individual stories and why we feel that these laws need to be reformed and in what ways. And so that's been a very powerful tool in getting funding for our organization, having other governments and different international organizations hear about the type of situations that our women are having to deal with, and it's been a big money puller. We've just received a ton of funding after starting those study booklets, and it's also been something great to disperse within the community and let people know, this is what your neighbors are going through. And then that helps a lot of people really come into our office and be like, I read this in the study booklet, and something similar happened to me. How can you help? So that's been really, really successful. We also have a quarterly magazine called Dimtsachin, which translates to Our Voice in Amharic. And so basically in that book, we just put out information about activities that we're engaged in. We also include short stories of women and whatever kind of similar to what was expressed in our case study booklets, and the laws that we're currently in the process of helping to reform, or whatever else, just to keep the community engaged, and also our sponsors, of course, let them know what we're up to. I was going to share a few stories with you guys from our case study booklets, but since we have such a restraint on time, I won't be able to do that. However, if any of you guys are interested in finding out more about the case study booklets or anything else, this is how you can contact my organization, Ethiopian Women's Lawyers Association. If it's not so clear, it's www.etwla.org. They definitely send out the Dimtsachin magazine and the case study booklets if you're interested, or if you really, really want to find out what's in those, you can talk to me, and I have a few copies at home. So thank you all for staying and listening.
I want to thank all of our intern panelists for bringing the world back home to us. And we're going to defer questions. If you have questions, you can ask the panelists afterward, and we're going to move on with the next portion of tonight's program.